Hey, everybody. Welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm Brian Doyle. And today's going to be a different one, I think, than some of the ones we talk about. We get in that pigeonholed conversation about service delivery and marketing and cybersecurity. But today we're going to talk about how to deal with the press. And that's something I think most of us during our MSP time really didn't understand. So I'm really excited to have somebody I've gotten to know a little bit more as of late and invite to the stage now, CJ Arlotta, somebody that many of you know, but I've gotten to know him a little bit more probably over the last 6 months to a year, right, CJ?
I believe so. Thanks for having me on the show, Brian. Appreciate it.
You bet. You bet. I'm excited about this one because this is a topic I think everybody can do better in, and that goes without saying, and we can all learn a little something from. So I'm excited to dig into your brain a little bit today, CJ, and understand how I can get out there and get more eyeballs on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But let's kick things off first with, just you sharing a little bit of a background about yourself and how you ended up in the crazy world of MSP.
Sure. So I've always been in communications my entire life. I started off working in politics. I worked for government officials. I worked on political campaigns. That's actually what I went to school for. But after I worked in politics and in government, I found my way into journalism. And that's when I found my way into the MSP space and covered that for a number of years. I enjoyed my time covering the industry, meeting with vendors and meeting with MSPs and really getting a great understanding of the industry. After that, I made my way into the healthcare space, covering that for a short stint as a journalist. And then I eventually made my way in the hospitality space as a journalist, covering that for a number of years and learning that space as well. Then after that, I know there's a lot going on here, but it's going to get to the point.
No,
Then
it all gets us to where we are today, right?
That's right. That's right. After that, I started my own PR agency in 2019, right before the pandemic. Perfect timing, of course, and decided to take clients in the IT channel space as well as the hospitality industry, because that's where I obviously have experience in. So been doing that since and been growing our portfolio. And I think we're up to around 15 clients or so between the two industries. So we've been doing extremely well and been enjoying it.
Perfect. And it's interesting, some of the industries you talked about. I had a little foray in healthcare when I came. It was in my non-compete period after exiting my MSP, and I don't know how you feel, but I'm glad that isn't where I found myself for the rest of my life.
I
It's
agree
a
with you.
different industry.
It's definitely a different industry, definitely different from the MSP space.
Yeah, different PR going on there. A lot more spin,
Yes,
it seems like,
a lot
than
more
anything
spin for
else.
Agreed.
But
Yeah.
what I'd be interested to hear from you is, okay, you're doing, it sounds like you've got two primary verticals you're working
Yes.
today. You've got healthcare, you've got IT. Where are they similar and where are they distinctly different? Because, from the outside, they look like two different worlds, but probably not underneath the covers, I'm guessing.
Well, I think when it comes to PR, when comparing the hospitality space to the MSP space, there are differences. But I think what's most important is understanding PR, understanding the relationships, and really getting to know the players. That's where you really excel as a PR agency, as a PR consultant, or if you're doing PR yourself. You have to really understand the industry. You have to understand the relationships in the industry. You have to understand the conference organizers, understand who the key players are, who the journalists are, who the association leaders are, and bringing all those people together, you'll be able to be more effective at getting your earned media coverage out there, pitching your stories. In addition to the relationship component, which is huge and something we've been focusing on, you really need to understand narrative and what makes a great story and what makes a great pitch to a journalist. Just because a journalist is friendly with me doesn't necessarily mean that journalist is going to cover the story I'm pitching. And there could be a variety of reasons for that too, right? Maybe my pitch was off. Maybe it's just not the right time for that journalist. Maybe the journalist is busy or the journalist at a conference. But the relationship component helps, because I always tell my clients it helps in the sense that they'll open up my email, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll cover the story. So understanding what journalists are looking for and putting something together and wrapping it up in a nice bow, that's one of the most effective ways to get media placements.
And I think what you're covering on there is a question that many people always say is like, what do PR folks really do, right? There's this concept of, I know they're supposed to help me with my outreach, but what do they do? And that connector part is really often overlooked.
Yeah,
Building those relationships, when you engage somebody in PR, at least from my experiences, it's because they have relationships you don't have.
right.
Or at least you can't materialize overnight, but yet you've got something big you might want to share. Maybe you can talk, dive in a little bit to, what are some of the what are some of the catalysts that, an MSP might not be thinking about that might be the right time to engage somebody like you?
Well, if you've never done PR before, you're correct, Brian. You really need to find somebody who knows what they're doing and has the relationships in that particular industry, especially in the spaces I'm in. We're primarily in the B2B space, so
Yep.
we do specialize in those verticals. So really understanding those needs of those journalists, understanding the topics and the trends that they're talking about, understanding what they cover in the industry, understanding what they're looking for when it comes to a podcast interview. That's really key to getting your story and narrative out. If you're not in a specific vertical, let's say you're an MSP and you're looking to get your message out there in the community, you need to see who the players are in your local community. Who are the reporters? Who are the podcasters out there, the content creators? Are there certain radio stations you can potentially be a guest on? Is there a chamber of commerce you could participate in and look at, public speaking opportunities? You have to really understand what those community members are looking for in order to be effective at getting your message out there.
And that's huge because, it's kind of funny in taking over this spot here at MSP Business School and now doing this for 5 years. I never thought there'd be a day where the media would be or the press would be approaching us, right? And one of the things that I do see that's interesting is sometimes they have no clue what the podcast is about, and some of these folks are just spraying and praying, because I try to coach them like, hey, I've seen you give me a couple of pitches before. Here's what I look for.
Yeah.
The company has to actively be doing some level of their business with managed service providers, not just they can help them. If they're not there, they're not the right people. We're focused on the business side of the house and blah, blah, blah. And you try to coach them, but you see some of them just they don't receive that message, and they're kind of coming from that spray and pray variety.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit to what you should look for there.
Yeah, no. As a former journalist, I used to receive many of those inquiries from PR professionals, and I could tell you what ends up happening is delete, delete, delete.
Yeah.
Right? We're looking for stories that are interesting to our audience that we cover. I used to receive so many different stories that just weren't relevant at all. They were completely irrelevant, like you were saying, where maybe it didn't even touch upon the industry, or maybe I covered a certain beat or area at the time where the pitch that they're sending me was for somebody else on staff.
Yeah.
And so when you're out there pitching journalists, you have to go out and understand who the journalist is, find out what they've covered before, get to know the website, the publication a little bit. Same thing if you're a podcaster or a content creator, right? If you're a PR consultant or you're an MSP trying to pitch a podcast, listen to some episodes, see what they're looking for, see the types of guests they're looking for. Are they looking for high-level executives? Is the conversation going to be high level? Or are they looking to speak to somebody who's going to be a little bit more technical?
Yeah.
So those are some of the things you should really be looking for when you're pitching either publications or you're pitching content creators. It's important that you understand who their audience is, because at the end of the day, the journalists, they have a credibility about them, and so do the podcast hosts and the content creators. The audience finds them credible, and they have a reputation that they have to maintain. And if they keep putting on people that's just missing the audience, they're going to start losing that audience pretty fast. So it's important that you take all of that into consideration instead of that spray and pray approach that's not effective whatsoever. And you usually see a lot of that when it comes to some of the larger agencies out there who may not necessarily specialize in these particular verticals. And, not to toot my own horn here, but that's kind of where somebody like me who knows the industry and knows the players comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, at some of the conference events, you'll get folks like yourself who are in that journalism PR space, who are willing to share, "Hey, this is how I want to be pitched, right? These are the things that I want to understand, and this is how you need to frame it to have a better chance of success for me." Maybe you can give your approach to, or thoughts to an MSP about, what they should be considering if they even want to pitch the media, because these guys, I'm sure, get inundated with a number of different things, and they have to choose the ones that are right, for the
Yeah,
publication for them.
for sure. Hey, if you have the opportunity to sit down with the journalist or the podcaster and get to know them a little bit, that's huge. And when you work in a particular industry like I do, that's a big deal. And I get that opportunity. So when I go to conferences, I'm able to sit down with journalists I know, or maybe podcasters I'm not familiar with, even journalists I'm not familiar with, and just kind of sit down, get to know them, understand what they're looking for. If you don't have that opportunity, and if you're working locally, you may not. Take a look at the reporter and see what the different journalists are covering. Take a look at the stories that they're covering. What are they looking for? Is there something that's trending? Is there something that's popular that people are reading? Look at those stories that the journalist is currently working on, has been publishing, and to ensure that it's newsworthy, right? If you're seeing things, for example, if you're seeing there was a recent ransomware attack at the national level, there may be some local publications, news stations, podcasters who are looking to talk more about that, and they're probably looking to talk to somebody who's local, who could provide that type of insight on that particular topic that they're covering. And I would also add, and I know, Brian, we've discussed before, that you shouldn't just reach out to a reporter when you need something.
Right.
So do this ahead of time, right? All these stories, they're going to come up. That's what happens. There's going to be a ransomware attack, a cybersecurity attack. So that's going to pop occasionally. But take a look at what the journalists are covering and reach out, get to know them and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm with this MSP. This is my background. I can help you with these topics. And so when something happens, like a cybersecurity attack or a ransomware attack, when they go through their inbox, because that's what reporters like to do, they like to search in their inbox, they type in ransomware, cyber attack, cybersecurity, your email may come up and they may reach out to you because you emailed them maybe a month ago, 2 months ago. Or when you follow up, they'll see that you've reached out before, right? So it's about really building that rapport with as many journalists as you can. And again, journalists that obviously are, in the industry, and there's no point in reaching out to journalists who you're not going to reach out to, or they're just not in your area of expertise.
But that's an interesting perspective, and I kind of want to dig in that one a little bit. So,
Yeah.
really, what you're saying is, in some respects, it's almost offer yourself as a source before you go for
Yes.
the ask. And
Yes.
I think that's an interesting one. That's a tip I'm probably going to step away with today too, where, really, if you kind of offer yourself as a source in those times where they're looking for one, that's when they struggle, I'm sure, right? Like, and they've got their favorite nations, but they can't go back to them all the time, right? There's
Right.
also that piece, how many,
Exactly.
you know,
So I always tell our clients that we want to be resources to the journalists, right? That's what we're there for. We're there to offer them insights. Of course, we're going to be pushing our narrative out there, our messaging out there, and some extent we're getting our names out there. Yes,
yeah.
it benefits us, but we're also there to be a resource for the stories they're working on, or for the podcasts that they're working on. We want to be able to make their lives as easy as possible and be there for when they need us. That's another point. Ensure that you're accessible. Don't reach out to a journalist And then every time they reach out to you, you're unavailable, right? There's no point in doing that. Look, occasionally you're not going to be available, or maybe you are busy, and that's perfectly fine. Don't string the reporter along. Let them know, hey, honestly, today's not a good day to talk with you about this. If you have somebody else you can offer them, maybe somebody else at your
Yeah, from your
company
organization. Yep.
can handle it. Again, maybe you're not the right person. Maybe somebody else in your organization is. And if everybody's heads down and busy on some big project, maybe there's somebody else you can offer as a source. And don't look at that as well, we didn't get that earned media opportunity. We're giving it to somebody else. You should be looking at it as the reporter's now looking at you as a resource, and they're probably going to go back to you because they say, oh, hey, CJ seems to know somebody. Even if he can't help me out, he probably can point me in the right direction. And that's how you want to be looked at.
Yep, and that's a great point too, because if you try to take on something that you're not familiar with, right? Like,
Right.
I'm more on the business side of technology, right? If you
Right.
came to me and said, "What are the top 10 ways to go try to hack a network?" and because I wanted to get that media placement, I'm like, "Yeah, let me go in and answer that." You're not doing
Right.
yourself or the journalist any favors, and it's going to reflect badly probably on future opportunity as well. So,
Yeah.
think of it
Agreed.
smartly. If you can pass the lead to the right place, I'm sure that's not going to get lost.
No, and look, it depends on the size of your organization too. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're really small, you're limited on the number of people that you can pass an opportunity along. But I think you benefit the organization as a whole if you have more people out there, where more, if you're meeting with clients or prospects, they see that it's not just you as the face of the organization. There are a couple of other people that they can speak with, and that everybody is credible and they're experts in their domain. I think that's extremely important to consider.
Yeah, and I think that's something that everybody has to be aware of. Find your area of expertise, pitch it that way, pass it when it's not for you, but stay engaged, right? And
Yes.
uh and that's definitely going to help out. So, we've got ourselves as a source now, CJ, and we're starting to really look to build the relationship. Most MSPs are already wearing too many hats. So let's pivot a little bit into what you do. How can a PR specialist help that busy MSP where the owner's already chief cook and bottle washer, right? And they're in that emerging level where they're looking for that exposure. They're not, one of the big behemoth MSPs that have, already
Yeah.
got PR teams working underneath them,
Yep.
really looking to find that exposure. Where can a PR specialist help? What are the some of the entry points you can bring to a MSP to help give them more visibility?
So, first of all, I always tell clients or prospects it's a 50-50 relationship, right? We need your input in order to help increase your visibility in whatever industry you're trying to reach, or whatever stakeholders you're trying to reach. We're not
Yep.
magicians. We're not going to be able to do anything without your help. So you do have to dedicate some time to your PR efforts. It may not be your entire time. You may be able to take a lot of things off your plate, but you do have to contribute, because at the end of the day, it's your business, not my business. It's your
Yeah.
business. And we need your input. We need to know your story. We need to know your narrative, and we need to know how you'd like to be perceived in the marketplace. So that's extremely important. Many people first come to us asking about press releases, right? They need to get some sort of news out there. They need to get a milestone out there. Maybe they're offering a new service or solution, and they're looking to put a press release out there and hit the journalists that can really get the news, the message out there to the audience they're trying to reach. So working with a PR agency can help you do that. Get that press release out there. But that's really basic, right? That's kind of just base level, because you're not always going to have something to send out there to pitch to a journalist. So we help you figure out, again, working with you, what that story is. Maybe there are some things that we can share in between with journalists and maybe you didn't think was newsworthy, but we find it to be, just based on our experience working with journalists. Or we work with you to get your name out there as a thought leader. Like we were mentioning before, we reach out to journalists and say, hey, Brian's able to speak on X, Y, and Z. He'd be happy to speak with you if you're working on any stories relevant to those issues. Or we pitch you out as a thought leader in the industry to podcast, or we pitch you to journalists, and we help you put together thought leadership articles, contributed articles, so you build your credibility in the industry or the audience you're trying to target. Right? That's so important to build up that credibility, because it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while. And I could tell you that we've worked with people before, thought leaders before, or I would say probably before they were considered thought leaders, where we'd work with them, get them in some placements in, let's say, some trade publications, and then we'd start pitching to, let's say, maybe some cybersecurity publications. Those journalists are going to start looking you up, right? So if they see they can't find you anywhere,
Yeah.
they're not going to, they may reply, but they may not really see you as a credible source, because again, they have that credibility, that reputation. They're not going to put somebody, in an article or have them on a podcast if they're not really sure their level of expertise. But so if you build yourself up through the trade publications as an expert, then you work your way up to, let's say, some cybersecurity publications. At some point, those national publications, if they're working on a larger story, if you're looking to get in them, it's those top tier publications, extremely difficult, by the way. So it's not easy at all. But if you have that buildup and that reputation, they're more likely to interview you or, include you in a story, because, hey, all these other journalists vetted this individual, so let's give this individual a shot. Journalists, and you mentioned this before, Brian, that journalists keep going back to the well, but they really don't want to. They're just looking for other people they can work into the stories, right? Those people are just the ones they know are credible, that are easily accessible, and have always given them great insights. So they're always looking for more people. So that's a little bit of what we can do as a PR agency. So it's not just those press releases. It's really building you up and getting your message out there and getting you out there as a thought leader, so your audience sees you as one.
And I think that that's important at this stage of the game too, because there's probably never been more of an opportunity to get into media, get into the media stream, right? With all the podcasts and YouTube channels and other alternative formats that didn't exist. Let's call it even 10 years ago, right? It was either you got yourself on the local TV or you got yourself into the magazines, as you're talking about. Now there's all these alternative formats, but you also need somebody that understands which ones have eyeballs, which ones have the better opportunity, which ones are going to be the right fit for you. There are certain podcasts that I'm friendly with, in the industry as well, who know what I do, but I wouldn't go on their podcast because they're technical focused and I can't bring that story to bear, right? So even though they're like, when are you going to come on? I'm like, do you really want me on? Am I really the right guy? Am I going to bring you anything better except filling the slot?
Right. And that goes back to what we were talking about before, is really understanding the audience and understanding the level that they're looking to speak to you about. You mentioned the audience and audience size for some of these podcasts, for example. So many people are doing podcasts now. But I've had prospects and clients reach out when you pitch a podcast and say, hey, what's the audience size like? And I always say, hey, look, it's not always about the audience size. That's important at times. And there are some podcasts that do have great large audience sizes, but look at these emerging podcasts. Of course, don't just go on every podcast, but hey, maybe somebody in the industry who is credible in the industry is starting a podcast. Maybe are they investing in the podcast? Are they investing in equipment? They have top quality microphones and headphones, and this is a long-term play with them. They're known in the industry. Are they doing this podcast consistently? Are they doing it every Monday, every Tuesday? Look at their guests. Do they have guests? Are they familiar to you? Are they high-level guests? These are all things you should look for when somebody asks you to come on a podcast. Sure, maybe as your organization grows, maybe a podcast isn't the right fit for the CEO, but somebody else is the right fit. And we've discussed this before. And so those are some of the other things you should look at, but don't be afraid. Don't shy away from emerging podcasts, because you never know who you're going to meet. Maybe somebody who's first starting out in the podcast world ends up being a huge podcasting industry and ends up having a large audience, and you are able to establish that rapport sooner rather than later, where a lot of people having issues with trying to get on the podcast because it's so popular, and they're really looking for those top guests.
Well, if you look at even our industry here with the different podcasts, right? None of us are Joe Rogan that are doing these things. We did it as a way to help accentuate our business, right? There's two different types of podcasts in our industry from I see too. There are those of us that have a brand affiliation, but are really still coming at it from a thought
Sure.
leadership perspective. And then you've got folks that are in it to win it, truly doing it all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I think as an MSP, you got to assess what the podcast is going to do for you.
Yeah.
Almost any of the podcasts you get on, whether it's mine or others, is generally for thought leadership as an MSP, thought leadership pieces to build up that reputation and share it. But you should be looking at your local podcasters in your region that are running towards the audiences that you're going to be serving. And guess what? 600 eyeballs coming into a podcast in your backyard who are getting to hear you is far more valuable than 5 million eyeballs that'll never reach out to you across.
Yeah,
From a
absolutely.
perspective.
Get to know those podcasts in again your industry, but also locally. Are there other businesses that are starting podcasts that you've worked with before, other business leaders? Because again, that's where some of your leads may come from. And then on some of those industry podcasts, again, before I mentioned audience size, just because they don't have a big audience size doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't go on them, because I try to look at podcasters more as content creators, right? Whether it's a journalist or a podcaster, everybody's creating content. And so you can use that content to help build your credibility. You're on a podcast, you can share that on social media channels. You can share that in your newsletter. You're sitting down with a prospect. You can say, hey, look, we were just talking about this topic on X podcast. That prospect now sees that you're a credible thought leader in your industry and you know what you're talking about. So use that content. People are giving you this content and you're able to use it for your prospects, your customers. It's so important to look at it that way.
And by engaging a PR person like yourself, they can help navigate that trail for you too, as well,
Yes.
because that's a big part of it is, which podcasts am I going to for that thought leadership? Which articles am I trying to get printed for thought leadership, more so to build my resume into the industry versus the ones I want to get into, try to drive business, right? And get eyeballs that don't know me to come engage with me in a more traditional sense. And, those are two different approaches, but both in this day and age of 2025 need to be kind of in lockstep and in balance too, because if you're not doing both ends of it, the others can't feed off each other, right? I mean,
For sure. That's another reason why to work with a PR agency who can help you with your messaging and help you create that story, right? So you're always in sync. You're not just doing one thing on social media and another thing in your newsletter and another thing when you're on a podcast or speaking with a journalist. Your messaging really has to be aligned to be effective.
Yep. I mean, consistency is king. I go back to my old favorite stories about Joe DiMaggio, right? People used to say to Joe DiMaggio, one, he never got angry, but two, he always seemed to play so hard. And he goes, because you never know who in the stands is seeing me for the first time.
Right.
And even though you've told that story 100 times, you got to remember there's somebody sitting out there that's never heard it once. And today's the day that they're, getting introduced to you and are going to decide if they want to go that next step with you.
Right. I love that. That's fantastic. I think I'm going to steal that from you.
No, please do. Please do, man. It was one of the greatest statements. I never know who's seeing me for the first time, so I own my best, right? And it's just a great way to, say that you always have to show up.
Of course.
And,
always. And you know what? Our clients expect that too. When we're working with them to make sure that they're out there, that their stakeholders are seeing it, that prospects are seeing it, customers. You might be, again, talking about the same topics, but maybe that a certain publication hasn't heard it before. And again, the audiences kind of overlap, especially in industry here and there, but there are differences. And so it's important that you're able to get your message out there, with as many publications or content creators that you can.
And they're only remembering you for a period and a point in time. What you said before, if you say it to again 6 months later, still may feel fresh in their minds, right? So
exactly.
It's all about that timing piece as well.
Yep.
Well, CJ, we're getting near the end of our time. So I just want to make sure that we save some time for any closing thoughts you have before we get into how folks can potentially engage with you.
Sure. I think with anything else, especially with media relations, I think it takes time to build, right? If you're working with somebody who's in a particular industry you're in, it helps, but it takes a while to get things going, especially if you're starting from zero. Don't expect to see results right away from your PR efforts. Whether you're working with a PR agency or you're working on it yourself, it's going to take a while, even with established relationships, because people have to understand who you are, what you're about, and your message, right? Your story. So don't expect to see PR pick up right away. It takes a while, but if you're consistent with it and if you take those opportunities, it's really a snowball effect. So start today.
Perfect. And that's always the best thing when it comes to any of these things where it's outreach. Get out of your comfort zone, start today, make
Yep.
some calls. And if you don't feel like you can make those calls yourself, engage somebody like CJ who will help you on that journey. For those that are watching on YouTube, we've popped up CJ's URL here. But for those that are listening, through audio formats, it's cjmediasolutions.llc.com. We'll include that in the show notes as well. So go out there, visit him, and see how you could, what he can potentially do for you. If you want to connect with CJ, you can at linkedin.com, CJ Arlotta, and connect with him if you haven't already. If nothing else, you'll learn something different in your thread than the same old stories that we all share to each other from a tech perspective, right? So look at it that way. But CJ, from my seat, it's been great getting to know you a little bit, over a few different efforts that we've done. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm sure we'll be speaking more as we move on to the future.
Agreed. Thanks for having me on, Brian. Appreciate it.
You bet.